allowing us to share many high-level insights. Carrying forward, we have the roundtable discussion, but first, if you registered at the conference and are joining us through a live streaming in our official conference website, you can choose either Korean or English channel using the live streaming menu option. Also, anyone joining us through our official conference website can participate in Q&A and discussion by leaving their questions and comments in the comment section located in the website under the live streaming tab. The website also provides detailed information for this conference, including its program, biography of speakers, and presentation materials for downloading. With that, let me invite you to roundtable discussion chaired by Mr. Rikke Munk Hansen, who manages ASCAP's work on economic and environment statistics and is currently in charge of the statistics division of ASCAP. Ms. Hansen has worked to advance sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific during the past 2 decades, focusing on energy evaluation and statistics. She has facilitated numerous discussions on transformative changes to national statistical systems as secretary to the ASCAP Committee on Statistics, co-chair of the IAEG on disaster-related statistics, and in many other capacities. With that, let me invite Ms. Hansen to the stage.
Yes, good morning from Thailand and from ESCAP to this roundtable, one of the final discussions of this international conference on statistics. And it is my pleasure to moderate the discussions over the next hour or so, where we will be looking at the role of data and statistics in understanding and mitigating risks. And we will talk about what we've already learned from the ongoing pandemic, what we've learned from previous crises, and try to look at this and also think about what we've already heard during this conference in other sessions to see if we can extract some main messages for national statistical institutions and global institutions also working on statistics and data for development. And what we'll be looking at particularly are messages, lessons, recommendations that has to do with business continuity, data integration, operational integration, and with the view to really improving our preparedness for future crises. So this is the heading of this session. And knowing that the global pandemic is still going strong in many places of the world, including where I'm based in Southeast Asia, where the pandemic is really at its highest so far, we of course are not in a position yet to fully look back. But nevertheless, it's already been a pandemic that has been going on for 1.5 years. So there should be ample opportunity already now to take stock to some extent. And we also see that the heading is very much the pandemic, but along the way we hear about disasters. So the issue of preparedness is really front and center. And I'm thinking here, of course, not least of the recent events in Haiti. So it's just a reminder to all of us that disasters, they take different shapes and sizes, and they do strike different places, different parts of the globe at different times. But the issue of being prepared, being able to respond, also when it comes to the needs for data and statistics to help decision makers put together the best kind of policies that are risk informed, the best responses when disasters occur. It is really our business to do so. So this is what the panel and this roundtable really want to try to get our heads around. And I'm very happy that I have 4 excellent panelists lined up here to help us all get through this thinking exercise and maybe concluding exercise as well. You will see that you have long bios of each panelist already available on the conference website, and a few of the panelists have been speaking in other sessions. So I will simply introduce our panelists just by their name and the title. We have Mr. Juan Daniel Oviedo Arango, who is the Director General of the Department of Statistics in Colombia, and this is an organization many of us know best by the acronym DANE, which is also very present and seen in Juan's background here for our discussion today. We also have Mr. Rolando Ocampo, who is the Director of the Statistics Division in the UN Regional Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is my brother in my sister regional commission. So ECLAC and ESCAP enjoy a lot of good collaboration. Welcome to you, Rolando. We have Ms. Jenna Slotin, who is the Director of Policy for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Welcome to you, Jenna. Great to have you. We have Ms. Francesca Pierucci, who is the Assistant Director from the United Nations Statistics Division in DESA. Francesca, welcome. Good to see you. So what we do have here is a panel that really comprises of people who are experienced and work at the national, at the regional, and the global level. So I think the scene is set for getting a lot of good and different perspectives on the question we have at hand for this roundtable. Briefly on what we are going to do over the next 60, 70 minutes is that I'll take our panelists through 4 rounds of questions. We will have a bit of an intermezzo where there will be opportunity for the panelists to answer questions from the audience. So this is my cue to strongly encouraging those of you who listen in to be active and ask questions, because this is really what will help us and will help the panelists get to deeper levels of thinking and get some really useful results out of this roundtable. So please don't be shy, put in your questions, and I'll do my best to pass them on to one or more panelists so we can all benefit from their insights. So I think it's time to start. We will have 4 rounds of questions to our 4 panelists. And the first round is really a warm-up round so that you can all get going, and you can also get used to the time taking that I'm trying to manage here as the moderator, because this is also a quick round. And what I will ask each of you is to limit yourself to 2 minutes. And what I will ask you is thinking of what you've seen and heard and learned during the pandemic in terms of timely data, innovation to ensure business continuity, etc. What would you put forward as the 2 most important lessons learned or examples of innovation that have occurred during the pandemic, which is something that we really should take note on and build on as we move forward? And I'll call on you in the same order that I just introduced you. So Juan Daniel first, then Rolando, then Jenna, and then Francesca. So Juan Daniel, you have the honor of starting. So 2 minutes for your reflections on the key lessons. You have the floor, Juan Daniel.
Thank you very much, Vicky. You got me a bit stressed because of this enormous responsibility of starting this conversation, but something that I wanted to highlight as tremendous learning from the pandemic is that capacity building enabled by the international statistical community, I believe that is an essential facility for the resilience and the responsiveness that we national statistics officers and the heads of the national statistics systems we have currently and that we have performed during the pandemic. So I think that this is a very important asset, that it's not only a platform for capacity building that has become in a very, very fast way as an innovation lab, as an innovation platform in order to develop new techniques or new approaches of grasping information or integrating information. And the second learning, something which is from the prospective way, is that we national statistics officers, we are mandated to the data stewardship law, something that has been discussed in the last years as an opportunity to be fit for purpose, became essential for the future in our role in national statistics systems, because we need to develop capabilities to listen to our stakeholders and at the same time to provide some responses to increasing data demands that we foresee in our data ecosystem. So that's mainly the two main lessons that we have learned, and the opportunities also of keeping us together in the future in the international statistical community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And you are really leading the way here, because your intervention was exactly 2 minutes. So well done to that. These innovations in capacity building is something that I've definitely also noticed, that this is a good thing to take with us going forward. The data stewardship role, it's becoming more and more central to operations of statistical organizations. So thank you so much for sharing those lessons. Let's move on to our next speaker, Rolando. Let's see if you can do as well on timekeeping, and of course also on the contents. You have the floor, Rolando.
Thank you, Rike, and good day to all of you in Asia and the Pacific. Well, I think the two ones that I want to mention is, the first one is that we saw in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, so the development of portals for visualization and monitoring what was going on during the pandemic and the COVID, and that is an important issue, because that means that countries have the coordination in between the geospatial offices and the statistical offices to create this information and use all the techniques that was able to do in this regard. And the other thing, the second issue that I want to mention is that in our region, in ECLAC, and talking about the regional office of the United Nations, so the work that we have done and the innovation that we create is this new way of coordinating through webinars. So we will discover that webinars and the technology allows us to be connected and continuously be together, working aligned, using these webinars to implement the new technologies that we have to adopt. For example, the change to telephonic survey to adopt and try to incorporate, to use and take the information from the household surveys, and of course all the consumer price indices that we needed this new technology. But the most important is that we were able, as Juan Daniel mentioned, to coordinate ourselves through webinars, and they work, and they were a very good tool for the next and for the continuity of this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolando. And what you're just saying there is definitely echoing also from my end, as being a regional commission with similar responsibilities, that this connectivity is something that has, the benefits of it has become so obvious during this pandemic. And the other point you mentioned, that the advances in data communication and visualization also is something that enabled all of us to actually see what was happening. We are moving fast beyond the traditional statistical table also. Rolando, thank you so much for sharing the insights. And let's move on to Jenna. Jenna, you have the floor.
Thanks, Rike. I want to reflect on a little bit of what I heard in session 5A, which I was moderating yesterday. My first lesson to share is around how Anir Chowdhury from the government of Bangladesh, from a unit called A2I, which uses technology to promote development, was sharing how they just dramatically expanded the horizon of possibility. And there is an immense amount of innovation and creativity just to get the job done. And he was describing how they really had in Bangladesh no statistics to rely on when they started the effort to track illness, hospitalization, et cetera. And he was describing the many different ways in which they pulled data from a whole range of sources, at clinics, from mortality, from testing when it was up and running. And they were just working across so many institutions and agencies, including at local, very local levels. And the creativity that went into imagining what would be a data source we would pull in, how will we do it? So it's that integration point, even before we get to, but eventually got to those great visualizations and the platforms that Rolando was talking about, and how incredibly valuable those were. And so one of the things he was saying was just that expanding that horizon of possibility. From some of our own work, my second reflection comes from some of our own work in the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And that's around the spirit of collaboration and partnership, which is fairly typical in a crisis, right? People band together, but we really saw it in the data community and in different actors working together. So it's not a question of saying no, but saying, how do we do that? Anir Chowdhury again described how he was basically on a WhatsApp group with the 4 telcos, himself, the regulator, figuring out how to pull data together for mobility, et cetera. In Kenya, our partners formed what they called a food security war room. And they just pooled everything they had to figure out where food was, where it was moving, and to make sure that people weren't going hungry. So that spirit of collaboration is one that I would take away. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think you're pointing also to issues of let's say the culture of organizations here, that you're looking at being able to actually see new opportunities, which brings a lot of enthusiasm with it. And as you say, also one of the ways that's demonstrated is this increased willingness and sense of necessity of actually partnering up also with people we may not have worked with together. So Jenna, thank you so much for sharing. Francesca, over to you.
Thank you, Rike, and great to hear from the other colleagues. Very inspiring reflections, and good day, everybody, to our listeners. My number one lesson, I think I'd like to talk about the value of data. There's been an increasing attention and public interest in data since the pandemic started. To understand the pandemic, to compare across different population groups, regions, countries, and both the public and the policymakers, I think, have seen increasingly data as indispensable to feel protected, to move forward, to implement interventions. So I think the number one lesson is that we learned and we confirmed how critically important it is that there is an understanding by the public and by the policymakers of the value of data. And that is what has allowed NSOs, I think, to dare more, to play a bigger role, and to work across the system to an extent that they hadn't been able to do before. I think this is the key, one key lesson that we have to build on, but the challenge is to retain this interest. People should expect that all decisions affecting their health, their lives, their well-being are always based on timely, disaggregated and quality of data. So it's key that people continue to demand data, which creates the incentives for investments in the production and use of data for decision making. But it is up to us, our community, I think, to demonstrate the impact and the value of data. As I like very much how Professor Anim put it during his keynote address, proving the consequences of not using data. The second lesson I'd like to mention, the second reflection I'd like to make is about those countries that were more successful. From what we've seen with our work, the countries that were more successful in moving swiftly to this sort of alternative new mode were those that already had sufficient flexibility and the necessary framework for the National Statistical Office to engage with the other parts of the data system. So both within the official statistical system and the private sector. So it was easier for them to resort to the new data tools, to the new solutions. And in particular, of course, the close collaboration with health systems in this case because of the pandemic. And also where the ICT infrastructure for staff to work effectively were already in place. I'll stop here. I hope I stayed within the 2 minutes.
Almost, Francesca, almost. You all did very well. Thank you, Francesca, for sharing this. And what you mentioned just reminded me also of another presentation in a session yesterday in terms of this value of statistics, where several countries across the world have found that in terms of lockdown measures, statistics operations have not been considered critical functions and therefore have been hit very hard. And this, of course, has to do with what you mentioned in terms of, well, how does the rest of society actually look upon statistical operations in the sense of necessity and importance also during disaster situations? And maybe this is something that really we should take note of, so that the necessary measures are taken in terms of preparedness for future crises as well. So thank you so much, all of you, for reflecting on this first question. And I hope you are all warm now so that we are ready for a second round of questions. And I will start again with you, Juan Daniel. And because you are the panelist in this roundtable that is heading a national statistics office, I'm directing this question to you. We know that there were serious disruptions in regular operations in all statistical offices around the world. I'd like you to reflect on how these disruptions have impacted the overall statistical system in Colombia, and whether any of the changes you may have put in place is something that you already now know that you will integrate into the future work of your office. And Juan Daniel, you have 4 minutes for this reflection.
Thank you very much, Ricky, for the opportunity of sharing that, of giving us the opportunity to share about what has happened and what is going to be, let's say, a prospective attitude towards the national statistics system. Something that probably could be a bit philosophical, but the main issue that happened in the National Statistics Office of Colombia is that we started to raise ourselves important questions, as, for example, how do we know that we are going to accomplish our mission during the pandemic? Yeah, we know that in a very fast way, our government set some sanitary measures, lockdowns, we had to raise our hands to say we are essential facilities, so we need a special treatment for mobility and several issues that were considering the Colombian government, something that we are very thankful. But we started to say, how are we going to be sure that we are doing our right function during the pandemic? And that was tremendously essential because this started to approach ourselves to an institutional research way of using data ourselves in order to measure how are we going to be effective in implementing innovation, for example, in the collection of information with telephone supported platforms, because we, in the social perspective of our statistics, we use an in-person based survey framework. And this innovation was very important because this started to set how important is to think ourselves as an organization that connects with the data ecosystems that we have in our country. And that was tremendously important because in Colombia, currently, we are thinking about how the institutional effectiveness of the national statistics system could be approached with the integration of quality assurance frameworks and risk assessment frameworks for the statistical production in the case of official statistics. And rapidly, we started to see in a hands-on approach how data is limitless, and at the same time that technology is currently a very smart and sharp tool in order to integrate alternative sources of information. So in the answer of this, how do we know that we are accomplishing our mission? It was very important because this risk of not accomplishing of our objectives accelerated or became a catalyzing factor in order to go faster in the integration of alternative sources of information. For example, administrative records, something that had been very sticky in the Colombian case in the former years previous to the pandemic, but in a very fast way, we were able to align with line ministries, with the private sector, as Francesco was mentioning, in order to complement and to provide contrast to the new methods of surveys in the social perspective in the statistical production in Colombia. So what is going to become a permanent mission in the national statistics system of Colombia is how are we going to accelerate the integration of alternative sources of information, but at the same time, how are we going to take advantage of our keystone, which is the fundamental principles of official statistics. This was tremendously important because this allowed us to feel sure that we were able to innovate without violating a set of principles which are very clear and which are very sharp in the soundness and the fit for purpose of official statistics in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And I'm very impressed with the, let's say, strategic outlook that your response really demonstrates, and being able to actually review and revisit statistical operations during such a difficult period with that kind of outlook impresses me deeply. And I took a particular note also on this issue of looking at institutional effectiveness and operational continuity within the context both of the quality assurance framework, which is familiar to most of us, but also looking at a risk assessment framework in that context. And this is something I think I'm going to invite you to speak at one of our Asia Pacific convening forums on this particular topic, because it's something that comes up in a lot of discussions, and I think this would really attract some attention from the chief statisticians in particular, also in Asia and the Pacific. So thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And I will now move to your regional counterpart, to Rolando. And Rolando, you touched upon already in the first two messages or important lessons that you gave us, this issue of integration of geospatial and statistical information. And in the rest of the world, we are looking very much to your region when it comes to institutional settings, for this kind of for this kind of integration, because there is quite a few world-renowned statistical offices that manages to house this under the same roof. And what I'd like you to do is to share some key experiences you've had in working with countries on integrated data, and talk a little bit about how ESCAP supports this kind of integration. And Rolando, I'll give you 4 minutes as well, please.
Thank you. Thank you. First, let me tell you that one of the main issues that we wanted in ECLAC since 2017 is what was to integrate the geospatial information into the statistical information. And that's why the ECLAC decides to incorporate a regional advisor in geospatial information inside the statistics division. Taking account in this process, because we wanted to work with this project to create to give the continuity in terms of to incorporate the geostatistical framework, the geospatial and statistical framework that was adopted by the Statistics Commission and UNGGIM. So we began to work in ECLAC to incorporate this process with the statistical offices in this regard. And in addition, we began to give some capacity building and technical assistance from the geospatial side with the statistical offices in our region. It is in this regard, so we have been working through the Statistical Conference of the Americas, trying to incorporate year by year in our executive committee meetings and during the meeting also to incorporate this important tool and this important coordination within the countries. We have in 2019 in the session of the Statistical Conference of the Americas, we have a joint meeting with UNGGIM and the Statistical Conference of the Americas to incorporate this process. In this regard, so we ask for some funding from the European Union and from the development the development accounts that UN has, gives for development. A project to create geoportals in the statistical offices. So in Latin America, in the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and now we began in April, and now we have the coordination with it, at least 7 countries, and we began this process because we think that it's very important to incorporate this kind of coordination. So in this project, this project, so we took in one country the statistical offices and the geospatial office in the country, and we try to and we asked them to work together through a timetable that they have to do to produce these projects. I think this is an important issue and an important aspect. And of course, so the coordination that we have with some other regions, in particular with ESCAP, Enrique, because we are working in this regard, in this process, but not only this one, because we are working in trying to incorporate through the Sustainable Development Goals, taking all the developments, technical platforms that they have. For example, the one that you have in ESCAP, Enrique, to try to adopt it to our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolando. And I think it's just a good point in time for me to express my thanks to you and your team also for excellent collaboration. In particular, actually, I think it's been one of the positives coming out of the pandemic, that it is easier actually for collaboration when we are not all looking around for budget to travel, but thinking, okay, maybe we can have an MS Teams call. And I think that's maybe one of the things we should also take with us and make sure we continue also going forward. And Rolando, I just want to highlight a few of the things you said here in terms of supports from regional organizations, and this goes for global organizations as well. This idea of continuity in the support, which also requires resources. I think it's just a very important point to make. And another thing, the institutional collaboration, where this is one of the things where at the national level, we see the institutional collaboration being a major barrier, and being present from an international or regional organization is something that actually has quite some power in pooling different institutions into the same room. Very often we see statistical offices actually not having the convening power at the national level to get other organizations involved. If there is an invitation from the UN, that sometimes make a big difference. So Rolando, thank you so much for sharing. And I'll move on to Jenna and then Francesca, and I'll give the two of you the same question to reflect on. What I'll ask you to do is to think about, the role you both have in working globally and working across sectors. What have you learned to build more resilient data systems in the face of new future crises? So Jenna, the floor is yours. Again, this is a 4-minute round. You have 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Vicky. One of the first things I want to highlight is that I really think we've seen that resilience resides, at least in part, in people. So if people have the skills, the agility, the openness, the willingness to collaborate, that they sit within institutions that encourage that kind of approach and attitude, then the possibility to be creative, to be flexible, to work with others is much more likely in regular day-to-day as well as in a crisis. And I think that historically, if I may be so bold, in the official statistics community, that emphasis on those human dimensions and capacities has been lower than it may have been on some of the technical skills. And I think we have been seeing over the years, and especially in the face of crisis, the importance of those human dimensions. So that's one. And that has implications for training, for recruitment, for skill building. The second comes back to the very first lesson that Juan Daniel shared with us, and this is something I see in the work of the Global Partnership, and that is the value and importance of experience sharing and mutual learning and peer exchange, and the way that builds resilience and the way in which it can be done in a crisis to enable anyone dealing with a very difficult situation to understand that not only are they not alone, but there are a lot of hints out there on how to do it. So we've seen opportunities for peer exchange across a huge group of countries. Francesca, we've been collaborating on an administrative data collaborative that's been all about how to leverage administrative data and under the current circumstances. We've found in a lot of our work with the Global Partnership, when our team has been engaging with one NSO and they've been talking about a challenge, our ability just to say, well, we know that Ghana has done that before. So let's organize a phone call and just speak for an hour and see where that takes us. And in a lot of cases, it's gone much further than those initial conversations. It's become workshops, it's become other things. And I think that's really important for building a resilient national system, as well as a resilient sort of peer network that can help us through a crisis. And the last one I want to touch on is trust. Juan Daniel, I think, very rightly highlighted the sort of bedrock role of the fundamental principles of official statistics, which enable national statistical offices, of course, to maintain a high level of trust. But at the same time, we've also talked about the opportunities and the need, especially in crisis, to be working with alternative data sources. And frankly, like quality assurance frameworks are fairly esoteric for the ordinary person. But the awareness of the value and role of data, not just amongst policymakers, but amongst ordinary people that Francesca was pointing to, has really raised the temperature, right, around what's happening with my data and what are, especially sharing health data. There are big governance questions. And we've also seen this crisis has been a pandemic, but we're in crisis as concerns racial justice. We're in crisis globally as concerns climate justice. And there are big questions about the structural inequalities that exist at local, national, and global levels. And data is a big part of that, right? Whether it masks those inequalities or it helps to address them. And fundamentally, right, we need to go back to trust. And I think trust is really key to that resilience. So I'll end it there.
Thank you very much, Jenna. And you actually touched upon enough topics for us to organize another session, I think. But I'll just mention this one word about trust, because this is something that comes up. We talk about integration of data, sharing of data, alternative data sources. But of course, I mean, once we have governance issues, in particular related to the privacy, and we do have a momentum, which is what we heard also before, that there is maybe an increasing willingness right now because of the pandemic for actually moving some of the legislative pieces also in the favor of adding the opportunity for sharing. So there's something to build on here, but of course a major role also by a national statistical office looking at the data stewardship issue is to be the garant of this type of principles. This is, I think, a discussion that will actually continue for decades to come because things are moving. Francesca, over to you, reflections on the same topic. 4 minutes to you.
Thank you, Rike. Well, what we have seen over the pandemic as we worked with partners and we engaged with countries, but I would say also during the first 6 years of the implementation of the SDGs, because a lot of what we've done there is related to building resilience, right? So I think my number one point here is building capacity for effective data storage, exchange, interoperability, so that the different data sets can be linked up and can talk to each other. But we also need to support countries in the development of their institutional, the legal framework, to have the enabling environment, the development of soft skills. Those are important areas that we've seen in our work for NSOs to be able to establish partnerships with a wide range of data providers, including to ensure what Jenna was mentioning, to ensure data quality and to protect data privacy and confidentiality so that we have a balance between data sharing and protection. And so that data can be trusted, talking about trust. Important, I think, also is to build capacity so that the new data solutions can be fully utilized. Many new tools exist, but are not accessible necessarily to all countries. And this is one of the main principles of the Data for Now initiative, of which, of course, Jenna GPSDD is one of the lead entities, and our colleagues in DANE are also key partners, and they work with us for the implementation of that. But I would say also an important focus on actionable data. These last 6 years, the SDG framework has placed so much emphasis on indicators. I think in times of crisis, we need to think in terms of actionable data that can really inform interventions. One important point I want to make here is also not to forget about the foundational statistical systems. CRBS, census, surveys. We still have 40% of countries without a complete birth registration, 40% of countries with an insufficient death registration system. We cannot have a responsive and resilient data system without a functioning CRBS. And if government don't have those basic data, it's impossible for them to deliver the right interventions. Integration of geospatial, I think, information and data and statistics, I think we talked a lot about that, and that's critical. But I would like to add one point here, that to have agile and resilient data system, we need to also make sure that they are part of the disaster risk reduction strategies, that they're fully part of the whole architecture. But for that to happen, we need the right systems of governance and coordination, so that you have the National Statistical Office, the National Statistical Systems, the Geospatial Agency, and all the various institutions working on climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and in the case of the pandemic or other health emergencies, of course, the health institutions. I hope I stayed within the 4 minutes.
I seem to have managed to make all of you nervous. You are perfectly well within the limit here. Thank you so much, Francesca, and thanks also for picking up this issue of the foundations of national statistical systems, because I also do believe that there is actually an opportunity and a momentum for getting those foundations right, because of what you mentioned earlier, Francesca, that the value of data is more in the upfront and center, also in the public mind. And these foundations, it's never quick fixes, and it's very difficult to get both the resources and the institutional support broadly for really improving these. And we are in Asia Pacific warming up to a ministerial conference on civil registration and vital statistics, which is coming up in November this year. And our aim here is to get as much as possible out of the current momentum for getting one of these very foundational systems improved. Because, as you rightly say, they are not in place properly in so many countries around the world. And if that's not set straight, well, it has an impact on all the other figures that we are disseminating, also in terms of responses to various disasters. So thank you very much for that, Francesca. So we are moving quickly here to the next round of questions to our panelists. We are running a little bit behind time, so for this round, I'll ask all of you to actually stick to 2 minutes in your intervention. What we'll be focusing on here is to dig a little bit deeper into the topic that some of you already touched upon, and that is resilience. And what I'd ask each of you is to mention 2 important aspects of what makes a data ecosystem resilient and able to continue business operations during disasters. So the resilience of data ecosystems, which is of course linked to a continuation of data and statistics business operations during disasters. And again, you are very welcome to reflect on what you may have heard in earlier sessions of this conference or what you've just heard from your fellow panelists during the past hour here. I'll be a little traditional here as a moderator. I'll invite you in the same order as what we've done so far. So Juan Daniel, you have the pleasure again to start. The next 2 minutes are all yours, please.
Thank you very much. And this is, I think this is very important. This is, I feel that it's the most important part of this conversation because it puts together, for example, what Francesco was mentioning is that resilience is based on the clearness of the foundations of the national statistics system or of the data ecosystem. And the possibility of having clear which are the foundations of the data ecosystem is based, in my perspective, in also having clear which are the main answers that we have to provide to our world society. So I believe that a very important enabler of coordination that was mentioned also in the conversation, which is necessary in the data ecosystem, is that we have to understand ourselves, that we have to sit together leaders, followers, but also we have to invite enablers in order to find which is going to be the common purpose of the dialogue, the coordination, and the interoperability that we want to produce or to foster in our data ecosystem. And in this coordination approach, we believe that strategic partnerships, as a matter of example, that have been enabled by the United Nations Statistical Division, the leadership of COSTAT, that in the case of Colombia, we have benefited by the important support from COSTAT, and also some learning communities and innovation communities, such as that we have performed with the leadership of Rolando in the Statistical Conference of the America, are very good examples of how strategic partnerships are very useful in complex times. And finally, we believe that something that make a data ecosystem resilient is that we cannot forget ourselves, which is the main subject of the things that we day-to-day produce, and which are the subjects of our societies, the citizens, the enterprises, civil society organizations. And we believe that the pandemic and these difficult times that we have faced during the last months made us very, very clear that we have to start humanizing official statistics and combining not only sharp data and hard data, but also subjective well-being approaches of measurement, how our citizens are feeling themselves in the complex times that we are facing. So I believe those 3 times, having clear the foundations and the questions that we have to solve, trusting and believing in a strategic partnership, taking advantage of a very strong international statistical community, and third, focusing on targeting our citizens as the center of the statistical production is something very important that we believe that is going to allow resilient data ecosystems around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Daniel, and thanks also for stressing this human dimension. I think it complements very well what we heard also from Jenna before in terms of, you know, the skill space that we should be looking at in statistical institutions. Thank you, Juan. Let's move on to Rolando. So 2 important aspects from you, Rolando, when we talk about resilience. You have the floor, 2 minutes.
Thank you. so to see the data ecosystem resilience first, when we talk about resilience, so at least so we have to know what to do to go back to normality, to the continuity of a statistical project when you have a disaster. So and if you have cleared this process, so it is easy to be resilient. And I think all the fundamental principles, and I think the quality framework that we have applied on, and all of the standards that we follow through the statistical commission and through so we learn and we know how to do it. We know the way to do this process, and the countries and in our region, for example, and in ESCAP or ECLAC. So in the Statistical Commission, we have the continuity and try to apply and continue to give these procedures to the countries and try to continue to applying these issues. If we have clear in each country that they have to apply standards, they have to apply the quality of assurance, and they have to apply the fundamental principles, so they are going to be able to rebuild again this procedure. And in addition, I think, which is very important, so we have to give the countries a new statistical laws in the governments, with the government. So in our region, we have heard at least for 5 or 6 countries that are working in these new arrangements to identify and try to go to the Congress to have the new laws in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolando. And I think you're pointing to this, the role that regional organizations really can play also here when we talk about resilience, the normative work, but certainly also the work to inspire and convene and put some new, let's say, recommended best practices on the floor, convene the sharing of experiences among the countries in the region. Thank you very much, Rolando. And let's move on to Jenna. Jenna, you have the floor.
Thanks, Rike. So my 2 thoughts. The first builds on a lot of what's been said already about that enabling environment for partnerships. I feel like I can't not emphasize that. That goes to the legal and regulatory environment as well as the skills and capacity. And when that is there, and the experience of having done partnerships in different ways, and then being able to replicate it in times of crisis is obviously critical, and has been critical for the pandemic. The second point is really building on these sort of human skills and dimensions and these ideas of trust that I was mentioning, and around, I think, an element, perhaps newer element of the resilience of statistical systems goes to how to engage people, and what role might ordinary citizens play in the collection and production of data, and how to sort of expand people's agency around that, so that there's a greater understanding of what the process is, so that there's a greater understanding of those partnerships, so that there's a greater inclusion of different groups and communities that are affected, so that those communities may be able to define how those measurements are done and how they're then used in policies that may affect them. And that then builds that kind of relationship of trust, strengthens that core system, I think, and builds a greater support for those foundational systems. And it really goes to this evolving role of the data steward, or the functions of data stewardship across the national statistical system. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jenna. And I was just thinking back on your earlier comment on the fact that resilience resides in people, and what I'm hearing from you now are some of the measures statistical institutions can actually take to leverage that resilience, and also do theirs to increase the resilience of people when it comes to the data that actually enables them to be better informed of decisions. So Jenna, thanks so much for those comments. Francesca?
Yes, thank you, Rike. Well, I think I listed several aspects of resilience in our previous round, but I'd like to go back to one that I think is particularly important to me, and that is the ability to use different data sets and integrate them. And that requires two main things: the data interoperability and the right legal and institutional framework in place. For the aspects, the reasons I mentioned earlier, the protection of privacy, the quality assurance in the use of data sources, especially when you try to tap into new data sources and can be used in a fast and safely way, and safely in times of crisis, so that the data can be trusted. But there is another aspect that I would like to mention, and that is the issue of the resilient data systems are no use unless we cover all the important groups of the population. We need to know where the vulnerabilities are. In times of crisis, when a disaster hits, it becomes particularly hard to reach those that are the most affected, the more vulnerable parts of the population. And we go back to the foundational systems. Having a strong, well-functioning CRVS system and other administrative data is very important. When we surveyed the National Statistical offices with the COVID-19 survey, together with the World Bank on statistical operations, a large percentage of countries indicated that they had problems covering migrants, internally displaced people, rural population, older people, etc., persons with disability. And one of the reasons they indicated, the number one reason, was that they could not be reached by phone or web-based survey. So we need to think very carefully. We build a resilient system, we tap into all different data sources, but we need to keep in mind where the vulnerabilities are, be aware of what tools we use, and making sure we capture them. We capture the most vulnerable groups, because those are the ones that are the most affected by the pandemic, by all crises, by situations of conflicts, and as unfortunately we are witnessing currently. Over to you, Rika.
Thank you, Francesca. And what you're just mentioning is reminding me of a very interesting debate that I was privy to a few weeks ago, where we discussed, what is a natural disaster. And the argument was, well, there is no such thing as a natural disaster, because we define disasters by an event that has an impact on people, on the economy, on the environment. And the impact is always a function on how we organize ourselves as societies. Therefore, they are all human-induced, one way or the other. And I think that may be something to take note of also when we build these foundations for our national data systems. The points you were just mentioning, that if we build foundational systems where we know that it is potentially the people in the most vulnerable situations where we will actually lose the information the first, then we have to put a big question mark on the resilience of a system like this. So thanks very much, Francesca, for these reflections. And what I've just checked, and we do not have questions from our audience. And that is both good and bad, because it means, of course, that we do not have the interaction with the audience. but it also means that we can move ahead to the last round of hearing from our experts here on the panel, which means that I think we are more or less back on time. So in that sense, it's all both good and bad, just as we've heard in terms of lessons from the pandemic. So we are well in tune with our times in this roundtable. And what I would like you to do here in the last round is to give us a little reflection. And this is the creative round of this panel. You're very, very much invited to let your mind expand, look into the future, and just tell us briefly, what would you really like to see happen in terms of a change as we move forward, and no doubt will be met with disasters in the future also to come. And I'll just give you each 2 minutes also for that final reflection. And since we've just done it the whole roundtable, let's not change the order here at the end. I hope you don't mind, Juan, to start with you again. You've done excellently so far. So Juan Daniel, the floor is yours for the last time here. 2 minutes, huh?
Thank you, Ricky, and congratulations for such an excellent role as the moderating this important conversation, because we have seen several stages in the value of the conversation that we have to reform. Something that, in order to be very clear, that we would like to see happening is that we provide our societies some way of evidence-based grasping about the value of official statistics. Yeah, and something that Francesca was mentioning in some of her comments is that society is starting to see that even if data is limitless, there is an important value of official statistics. And this is something that could be very, very, very important and very enlightening, that our societies grasp the value of official statistics, because this is going to provide some purposes of being granular, being equity-oriented, or being gender sensitive, for example, or implementing differential approaches, because this is something that happens once that you have a very sound set of principles, but at the same time, you have a very smart innovation attitude in order to integrate alternative sources of information and keeping on your promises and keeping on your principles. So I would be very happy if together, working together in the international statistical community with the leadership of the United Nations Statistical Division and several entities that have been essential during the last months in developing capabilities around the world from statistical offices, is that we can develop a single and common voice to telling our societies official statistics and the value of official statistics is essential in order to provide a smart recovery and at the same time to build back better in the sustainable development agenda. This is my dream, let's say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for putting it so eloquently, Juan Daniel. Let's move on to Eklag and Rolando for thoughts about the future. Rolando, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ricky. And I'm going to talk about from the regional perspective as is my case. So in this regard, I think the regional offices and the regional aspects, so they react quickly to attend and to coordinate from the statistical side the different problems that countries were facing during the pandemic. But and one of the things that it was very important, and we tried to implement, was the coordination in between the countries and the coordination inside the different ministries and the different aspects. So one aspect that really we would like to see in the future is the participation of the private sector. For example, so we saw the coordination and that the telephonic companies give a lot of information to the statistical offices to produce a lot of geoportals and a lot of, in our region at least. So we saw one in Colombia, Mexico, and some other countries that we could see. But because the private sector, the companies give the information to the statistical offices, and that didn't happen before. And what is very important is try to learn from these disasters like the pandemic, and to see how to be coordinated in a better way. I think this is the things that I would like to see in the future, this kind of coordination, and of course the way as a regional offices try to react better, quicker, just to give. In our region, we have more than 17 webinars during 9 months, trying to apply different methodologies to participate, to give this capacity building to the countries to react in this project. So this is the way that I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolando. I'll hand it over to Jenna for some futuristic thinking. Jenna, please.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we've been discussing today really comes down to strategic investment. So when you prioritize a system, right, those foundational data systems, the value of official statistics, as a government or as an entity, it comes down to allocating the appropriate amount of resources, financial, and then of course human. And what is the full spectrum of the strategy that goes into building a smarter, more interoperable, more capable system that's able to partner with diverse agencies, right? That has the legal and regulatory framework to back it up. It all requires time and energy, and that goes to investment. So it's about making the national data ecosystem a strategic priority as sort of underpinning infrastructure of the entire system, and investing in it as a strategic priority. That's the vision, I think.
Thank you very much. I've just underlined the word strategic on my notepad here. We've heard a lot about that actually from all of you. And Jenna, thank you so much. And Francesca, last round for you, last speaker for this roundtable. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rike. I think my dream is similar to Jenna's. What I hope to see is a real change in the way we approach all this. More investment in data and in information infrastructure. A year into the pandemic, only 60 countries had data on COVID-19 infection and death that were disaggregated by sex and age. I think that's unacceptable. We really need to change the way we look at data, the way we prioritize data production. And my hope is that we've learned enough of what this serious data shortages have meant over these 18 months to see now a real change, new investments, a new way we use funds, a smarter way to use funds, more mobilization of domestic resources. And we should not forget also one aspect, that to have a full digital transformation, we need to connect those people that are not connected. And that's 50% of the world's population. So we cannot implement many of our new digital solutions unless all those are connected. We cannot leave half of the world population behind. So now the statisticians need to be part of this process, and data, really we need to see data as an asset, and data production and use should be prioritized. Over to you, Vic.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and you've very nicely brought us to the end of this panel. We said, or this roundtable as it's called, but we set out to figure out what we've learned from previous crises and the ongoing pandemic. And I want to thank all of you for your reflections here, because I think we can summarize it into, we have actually learned a lot. And we could maybe even say what Francesca just said, well, we've learned enough. Now it's actually time to do on the basis of all these learnings. And we have actually run a little bit past our scheduled time. So I will let that be my final words also as the moderator of this roundtable. And thank you so much. Thanks to the audience who listened in. Thank you to our 4 excellent panelists here. It's been a real pleasure. I hope I'm not the only one who learned a lot. So I wish, all of you, since you're in the Western Hemisphere, a very good night. And I'll wish the rest of my fellow Asians here a very good day going forward. So thank you so much. Pleasure.
Let me thank
Thank you,
Ms.
everyone.
Hansen and the
Bye-bye.
panelists for a great discussion highlighting value of solid foundational systems for resilience.